Okay, I think we'll kick things off. We can see people coming in there to the session. I'm delighted to welcome our final Locknote speaker for today's conference. Michael Daniel is President and CEO of the Cyber Threat Alliance in the US. He's going to talk to us about combating ransomware, a comprehensive framework for action. We're really delighted to have Michael here talking about the Cyber Threat Alliance, which is a not-for-profit organization that enables cyber threat information sharing among cybersecurity organizations from across all different sectors. Prior to CTA, Daniel served as a special assistant to President Obama and was cybersecurity coordinator on the National Security Council staff. So in this role, Michael led the development of national cybersecurity strategy and policy and ensured that the US government effectively partnered with the private sector and non-governmental organizations and other nations, which we've heard as a common theme throughout the sessions today. Daniel has also worked with the Aspen Cyber Group and the World Economic Forum, where he has met Jackie Fox, who is our moderator for the final session, through the World Economic Forum, and they worked together on that. And so Jackie's going to moderate the session for us, and any questions that you have, if you can put those into the Q&A function, Jackie will be monitoring those throughout the session, and we'd like to hand it over now to Michael for his presentation. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you, Owen, and thanks, Jackie. It's always good to be working with you. So thank you for having me here today. My topic that I want to talk to you about, I mean, there's a plethora of topics, right, that we could talk from, and you've discussed a number of different issues over the course of the day today. But what I'm going to talk to you about is how we deal with a particular scourge, ransomware, that has really become quite a significant problem for us. And then we will turn it over to questions at the end, and we can delve into whatever you would like. So from what I'm going to talk to you about today is a framework for action that was put together by a group called the Ransomware Task Force. This was started last year by the Institute for Security and Technology and consisted of a lot of different people from around industry and government. And put together this comprehensive framework for addressing this problem. So I think the key thing why did we pick ransomware? Why were we so focused on ransomware? And I think the bottom line is that ransomware has really changed from an economic nuisance to a national security and public health and safety threat. If you think back to 2012, 2013, certainly here in the US, and I think in most of the rest of the world too, ransomware was essentially a cybercrime nuisance. Ransomware would infect individual computers, mostly of individuals, and the ransoms that were charged were $300, $400, $500 US, and they were paid in gift cards, was how they demanded the ransom. Now, ransomware affects entire organizations. It affects critical infrastructure. It is highly disruptive to our societal functioning. The ransoms are into the millions. The average payments, you can see them there back in 2020, we're starting to top well over several 100,000, with the top ransoms well into the millions. So really, ransomware has become a national security and, as Ireland saw quite directly, a public health and safety threat. Because of the disruptions that it can cause to different sectors in the case of your healthcare system. But we have seen this in other sectors as well, from the pipelines here in the US to the agricultural sector to the educational sector. So I think that all of this leads to saying that how we have to think about ransomware has really changed. And we can no longer just simply treat it as a criminal nuisance that we have to deal with on an ad hoc basis. The impact of ransomware is pretty clear. We've talked about some of the monetary aspects of it, but also just the downtime. Even when a business pays a ransom, it is taking on average 287 days to fully recover from an attack, and some much longer than that, and taking millions of dollars. So this has really become a a significant problem, and it's global. Getting good data on this is actually a really is a real problem as well, because a lot of companies don't report when they have been hit with ransomware. But we know that it is a significant event across the world, not just in the United States. So I would argue that there are at least, a logical question would be, so why now? What has made ransomware into the problem that it is? And I would argue that at least 5 factors have contributed to ransomware's evolution. One is that the criminal ecosystem is now highly specialized and professionalized. As you probably have been picking up across the course of your day, if your image of the hacker or the cyber criminal is a disaffected young male wearing a hoodie, still living in his mother's basement, that is not what we are dealing with. The cyber criminal ecosystem is highly professionalized now. It is dominated by organized crime, and it is highly specialized. And this has meant that they can develop special tools. They can make those tools easy to use. And it has really become a big business. Cryptocurrency has also really facilitated the rise of ransomware. It's hard to imagine sort of demanding millions of dollars of payments in Starbucks or Amazon gift cards. So cryptocurrency has really enabled the ransoms to balloon in size and has really enabled them to move very quickly. And many of those cryptocurrencies are outside the oversight of much of the global financial system right now. The third factor is access to safe harbors. There are countries that have specifically found it in their interest to provide a place for these cyber criminal groups to operate out of with essentially impunity. So that's enabled them to grow. And people are paying. They're paying the ransoms. As we've seen on some of the previous slides, it is big money. And that's just what we know about. My personal guess is that the amount of money sloshing around in that ransomware ecosystem is easily into the billions of US dollars. And then finally, digital dependence. We are dependent on these systems now in a way that holding them at risk makes it such that organizations feel compelled to pay those ransoms. So those factors have come together to really drive ransomware's rise as a threat. So what was the ransomware task force? It was a group of about 60 different experts from industry, government, law enforcement, civil society, international organizations. It met from January through April of 2021, and it drew on the expertise from many different sectors that you see listed there. Now, the vast majority of us on the task force are American, and while we had some international representatives, especially from our friends north of the border to us, from the Canadians, we ended up focusing most of our recommendations on the US because of that perspective that most of us had. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But really, the task force met and it came up with a framework for, after a lot of discussion and debate and activity, we really came up with a framework for how nations can work together to better combat this scourge of ransomware. And you could really put those task force recommendations into 4 broad categories. One is how we better deter ransomware attacks, how we can disrupt that ransomware business model, how we can better help organizations prepare for and be more resilient to ransomware attacks, and how we can respond to ransomware attacks when those first 3 things inevitably fail some of the time. How can we actually respond to those better? If you're interested in the report, it's still up at that website there, the securityandtechnology.org Ransomware Task Force Report. You can find it there to read the full report. But we developed 48 recommendations across that framework that specify both medium and short-term actions. And these primarily address policy and process rather than technology. So it's not really about buying the latest technological solution to defeat ransomware. It's about how you put together the policies and processes to do it. And the focus is really on the US government. due to the task force's recommendations, due to the task force's composition. The one issue we did not reach consensus on was whether or not to recommend banning ransom payments, whether government should ban ransom payments. And there were very intense feelings on both sides of that question. We could talk about that if you want, but that was one place where we were not able to reach consensus among the task force members. And we very much are interested in modifying the recommendations to work in other countries. So as we go through, one of the things I would say is, how could some of these recommendations be adapted to work in the Irish context? We were very mindful of the fact that political and cultural contexts differ around the world, even among our close allies, countries like Ireland, and we did not feel that we had the expertise to recommend to anybody else how they should organize themselves to tackle these challenges. But we do think that much of what we are recommending is applicable in other countries once it's been modified for your particular political and cultural circumstances. So what we'll do now is I'll go through some of the priority recommendations that we had, and then we can move into the question and answer portion of the event. One is prioritization. We have recommended that fighting ransomware become a top priority, not just for law enforcement, but at the international diplomatic level. And a comprehensive resource strategy, including a carrot and stick approach to dealing with the safe haven issues. And you're starting to see the US government move in this direction. They recently convened that 30 nation group earlier this week to look at this issue, or last week to really begin to tackle these issues in an international environment. So we definitely think that this is where a lot of countries are headed, but this needs to be sustained over the long term. Second, we are not going to be able to defend our way out of this. While we do need to raise the level of cybersecurity and resilience, we also are going to have to go after the bad guys. And this is going to involve a sustained whole of government, intelligence-driven anti-ransomware campaign. In our case, it needs to be coordinated at the top at the White House. And it has to be driven across multiple different agencies, because this is not just a law enforcement problem. It's not just a Homeland Security problem. It's not just a State Department diplomatic problem. It's not just a Treasury problem, but it's all of those. So we have to get our interagency working together, our new national cyber director, to really begin to focus on this problem. Not only at the strategic level, we also need it to be happening at the operational tactical level. And so that's what that internal US government joint ransomware task force is. In the US context, we actually need to have not just the tippy top, but the operators actually focused on this issue and put together in a joint task force that actually has a clear mission and mandate. And then the other piece of this is it actually needs to be working in collaboration with industry, because there are capabilities that industry brings to the table. ISPs, cloud service providers, cybersecurity providers, large enterprises that the governments need in order to actually drive this anti-ransomware campaign. And the other point I want to make here is that this is not just about arresting cyber criminals. If we can put handcuffs on some of these individuals, that's great. But for the most part, we're not going to be able to do that. So we need to look at all the other different ways that we can disrupt what they are doing, from going after their infrastructure, to going after the money flows, to making their lives more difficult wherever they are. So there has to be a wide variety of potential outcomes that could be considered successes here in order for us to really go after these cyber criminals, because we're just not going to be able to get to all of them. As I mentioned, some of the time we are not going to be able to prevent ransomware attacks from happening. And so governments should really establish cyber response and recovery funds to support ransomware response. Many organizations just do not have the resources to recover. particularly here in the US, our local governments, particularly school systems, have been heavily targeted, and they just do not have the resources to, even if they choose not to pay the ransom, they don't have the resources to fully recover from these kinds of attacks. But we also think that organizations should be required to report if they're going to make ransom payments, and that organizations should be required to consider alternatives before making any payments. One of the things we learned from incident responders that were participating in the task force is that many times organizations don't even realize that there are things out there like No More Ransom, which is a joint effort to publish decryption keys so that you have an alternative to actually paying the bad guy for the key. You can get it for free from No More Ransom. Now, that doesn't always work, but you should at least consider those alternatives before you make payments. And we think that if you have to report on making ransom, when you make a ransom payment, that this will give governments a much better sense of who's paying, what industries are being targeted, and it will also make companies really think before they decide to pay, and make sure that it is really that is what is in their interest before going down that path. But it's also important to note that, again, the core of this is those cyber response and recovery funds, so that organizations have the ability to say no. That's really where we want to get to. Of course, we also want to develop a broad framework to help organizations prepare for and respond to ransomware attacks. Now, the good news is that for the most part, the things that you do to get better at fighting ransomware also prevents other kinds of cyber incidents like intellectual property theft or business email compromise or other kinds of malicious cyber activity. So the kinds of things that you need to do to become more resilient to ransomware are broadly applicable to almost all the digital threats that you face as an organization. We also looked at incentives, both in our case, tax credits or regulation, so both the carrot and the stick, to drive adoption of some of these better practices. My own view, it was not necessarily articulated in the task force report, but what my view is that here in the United States, we've had a purely voluntary approach for over 15 years, and it has not generated the level of activity that we want yet. And so that we are going to have to look at some more, enforcement and regulatory sticks here in the US context in order to drive some of the action that we think probably needs to happen. And lastly, I'll hit on finance, cryptocurrency. Because cryptocurrency is so important to the ransomware ecosystem, the task force's view was that the cryptocurrency sector needed to be brought more into the global financial system. To be clear, the task force was not against cryptocurrency. That's a technology, and like most technologies, it's actually value neutral in many ways. It's how the technology is employed that causes the problems. And so, from our view, the government should require cryptocurrency exchanges and the over-the-counter trading desks to comply with existing financial rules, including know your customer and anti-money laundering and combating terrorism laws. I mean, they really should essentially be brought into more of that global financial structure. So that's really the core of the recommendations that the task force made. Now we're working in small groups to implement the recommendations. The Cyber Threat Alliance is working on one that's highlighted here, which is the Ransomware Incident Response Network, which is trying to improve the amount of information that is available about ransomware, both collecting it so we understand what the level of incidence is around the world, but also enabling victim organizations to have more access to resources and to distribute alerts so that there become fewer victims. And we're always looking for ways, as I said, to internationalize the recommendations, hence one of the reasons that I wanted to have this discussion with Cyber Ireland. So that's really the core of the presentation that I wanted to make today, and I will happily turn it over to Jackie to start the Q&A.
That was really good. Thank you very much, Michael. Very comprehensive. And for any of you who have not read the report that Michael is referring to, I would highly recommend that you do. I think Owen popped the link into the chat, but it's easy to find online. It's a really quite a deep report with a lot of expertise went into actually drafting it, and a lot of discussions went on in the background behind it. And I think you covered a lot of the areas that some of the Q&A came in from, but there's one or two things that I'd like to pose to you as well. And I know we've had discussions before, Michael, around, disruption of the criminal pathways, the criminal supply chain kind of coming in. And I would like to hear what you think in relation to the role of cloud service providers on that disruption, given that often the criminal infrastructure is often hosted on public cloud. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, and that's Jackie, that's actually a really good point. And I think that's why the private sector has to be part of these disruption campaigns, precisely because of that reason that you identify. Cloud service providers have to be part of those discussions, and we have to figure out how to enable them to enforce their terms of service and provide incentives for them to find those instances where the bad actors are using their infrastructure, and to take that down and make that an affirmative role that those cloud service providers play within the ecosystem. Now, as part of that, there has to be some benefit and protection for those cloud service providers in doing that. And so that's not just a responsibility that we can just levy on them without actually having a discussion about, okay, what liability protections are they going to get, and how, what's the process for the government saying this is a malicious activity, because obviously what we call, this can lead you down a slippery slope, because what the Chinese and the Russian governments call malicious activity, we call free speech. So there's definitely some legal process and structure that needs to be put in place, but clearly those cloud service providers and other kinds of service providers have to be part of the discussion.
Right, thanks, Michael. And a similar enough question in relation to insurance providers. Like, we've watched the kind of story with insurance providers unfold, where some of them will cover within a policy the actual payment of a ransom, whereas others will say, actually, no, we will not fund organized crime, so we're not going to pay the ransom, but we will help you to reconstitute your systems. And then we're also seeing other people saying, well, actually, you're only going to get an insurance policy if you can reach these minimum baseline standards. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that and how you think it's developing.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's happening is you're seeing the cyber insurance industry finally start to evolve to where a lot of people thought it was going to be many years ago. Which is to say that it could actually start to drive adoption of better cybersecurity practices. Part of the issue was that for many years, what the cyber insurance industry was what the insurance industry refers to as a soft market, meaning that the competition between insurance companies was on having as few requirements as possible to give you a policy. And as losses have started to mount, the market has started to harden, and that's the term that they use. And now we're entered a stage where the cyber insurance market is a much harder market. And that means in order to get a policy, you're absolutely right, Jackie, they're starting to say things like, you want a policy or you want to maintain your policy, you're going to have to meet certain requirements, and you're going to have to demonstrate to us how you meet those requirements. From my perspective, that's a much better place to be. Because that will help drive adoption of better cybersecurity practices across the ecosystem. Cyber insurance definitely has a role to play, just like firms insure against a variety of bad outcomes. That's, insurance should play a role here. I do agree that I think more insurance companies ought to move towards a policy of not having insurance be available to pay the ransoms. But I actually think that usually the ransom payment is often not the most significant cost that firms face. So I think having the insurance available to help deal with a ransomware attack is really important, but definitely trying to reduce the amount of money flows to the criminals is really important.
All right, thank you. And I think it's a debate that we're going to see playing out, over the next 12 to 18 months quite strongly, because I think one of the issues that I've certainly had feedback on is that, the insurance companies want to drive the response, which are, their focus is minimizing financial loss. Whereas actually the focus of an organization that's been hit may not be the same as that the two needs may not meet in the middle. And I think that's going to be very interesting how that plays out. Kind of there's a few questions here in the chat, and it's the perennial thing. And I know you said that part of the task force, they did not agree on the pay, not pay angle. And there's a suggestion here, could we prosecute those that pay? For me, I often think in relation to that, bring that back to the physical world and think of somebody being kidnapped and having a ransom on them. And, are you going to prosecute somebody and risk life? And I think there are a lot of parallels like with ransomware as well, and payments of that, so I'm interested to hear your perspective, maybe even on percentages like of those groups between the pay and not pay and all those different arguments that came up, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's not, at one level, the argument is very well trod, right? It's obviously one of the big reasons that, this has become such a big issue is because organizations are paying and they're making a lot of money. The cyber criminals are making a ton of money. So obviously, if fewer organizations paid, then that would reduce the amount of money going into the ecosystem, which would be beneficial for everybody. One of the tools that you could look at is actually making payments illegal. That would almost assuredly reduce the number of companies that would pay ransoms. Now, the problem with that, right, is you get situations where companies feel like they have to pay or they will go out of business, where you've got small businesses that have, that this is the life of somebody. This is where they put their livelihood, their entire effort into building that business, and it can be destroyed overnight by one of these ransomware attacks. For a larger organization, like a hospital, you could have literally lives at risk, right? And you could be endangering lives and sort of everything in between in terms of economic impact. So that's why, while I believe that ultimately government should make ransom payments illegal, that is the last thing you do at the end of a very long sequence of events. And that if you think that that's the easy button from the policy standpoint, it's not. And that has to be at the end of the sequence of setting up things like the response and recovery funds and really ensuring that you are supporting the victims of ransomware and that you're supporting your critical infrastructure and enabling them to say no, to set up the entire incentive structure so that they don't even feel a need, they don't feel compelled to go down that path. That's where we actually need to get to. And then you could actually make the payment of ransoms illegal as kind of the final push to reduce the size of that market. But it is a really tough question, and it needs to be handled with care and an understanding of the consequences and the price that could be paid as a result of it.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and I think it's something we need to bear in mind in the same way that all of us involved in cybersecurity and technology, innovation is key to us, but actually the criminals are very innovative too. Like they're not, as someone said earlier on, they're not kind of kids in hoodies and basements that are doing this. They are organized business models that are, and we found that the whole model has changed from going in and encrypting to stealing data and encrypting to stealing data and encrypting and DDoSing. And, I think it's going to continue to evolve. So as every time we hit back and think we've got something saying, haha, we've got backups, you can't get us, something else happens, in the cycle. So I think it's all very complicated. Michael, thank you very much for coming to speak at our conference today. We really value your presence. And again, I would reiterate to people, please go and do read this report. It's really, really good. And on that, I'm going to hand back over to Owen or Paul, I think it is, to close out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Michael.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Michael. And thank you, Jackie, for moderating the session. It's been a fantastic day, starting off with Ireland's national cybersecurity, with the Minister to the European perspective on NIS2, and now closing with incredible insights on the importance of threat information sharing and the ransomware task force and international collaboration there. Before we bring the conference to a close, we have a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces to take care of. We're going to announce the winners of our prizes today. So thanks everyone for completing the form for the virtual Capture the Flag event. There was a huge number of organizations that actually entered it. And the winners that we've picked out are, at random, may I add, Paul Connaty from CWSI and Jason Scanlon from Numata IT. So Technology Ireland, ICT SkillNet, we thank them for that prize that they've sponsored, and they're going to be in touch with you over the coming week to organise those 2 virtual Capture the Flag events for your organisations. We also have a couple of winners for the Cyber Ireland goodie bag. We had some really good questions throughout the day. We probably actually didn't have enough time to go through all of the questions in each of the sessions, but the winners of those for best questions and the social media posts are Anya Cotter, Lar Conroy, Anya Weldon and Declan Dunn. So we'll get those goodie bags out to you next week as well. A reminder as well that we still have a whole series of events planned for Cybersecurity Month. It's not just the conference today. For example, this week we had 2 events on cybersecurity careers, one for how organizations can support career development and getting involved in promoting cybersecurity careers to young people. And we had a second one then on career promotion to secondary school students, which were both organised by CyberSkills. After the conference next week on Tuesday, we have a webinar with the Defence Forces on cyber defence, the current state of national and international cooperation with Ken Sheehan. Then on Thursday, we have a virtual SME multinational networking event. So this is organised with Enterprise Ireland and IDA Ireland, and is about how we can connect multinational companies and SMEs within Ireland's cybersecurity ecosystem. If you'd like to register for that event, you can email me afterwards and we'll send you out the invitation link. And then early in November, we've also partnered with Intertrade Ireland on a 2-day workshop on cyber public sector opportunities. And that's also in collaboration with the Northern Ireland Cybersecurity Cluster as well. A couple of thank yous as well. I'd like to note that all of this wouldn't be possible without our conference committee, our partners in Enterprise Ireland, IDA Ireland, Munster Technological University and the National Cybersecurity Centre. In particular, I really want to thank the chairs for putting together all of the sessions today, pulling together some fantastic speakers. So that's Jackie, Carmel, Tom and Donna. Thank you so much. Well done to all of our speakers as well, and for their time and contributions, both from Ireland and abroad. And then in the background, there has been a conference team from Cyber Ireland and MTU working away over the last number of months, getting everything ready for today, making sure all the technical issues that were going on in the background didn't show up on the day. So I think that it's been a real success, and I just want to thank them for all their hard work over the last number of weeks. And I think, you know, on a general note, the success of Cyber Ireland to date has been because of the contribution and the buy-in of the cybersecurity industry and the community and the people who are on this conference today. And this cybersecurity community, it existed long before the cluster was launched back in 2019. And it's that contribution and commitment which is on show today that has made this conference a success and will hopefully lead to many more conferences on an annual basis for Cyber Ireland. So thanks very much for your participation. And on one final note then, I want to encourage you to get involved in the cluster. You've come to the conference today. Many of you are already participating through our various different working groups, our regional chapters, attending the events, or even just sharing what we're doing, our activities with your network and within your own organizations. And that's really important. So keep doing that. And if anybody else would like to get more involved, please reach out to me afterwards. And I really do look forward to getting out and meeting people in person again when that time comes. But in the meantime, as I said, please reach out to me if there's anything that we can do to support your organisation or to help grow the cybersecurity industry in Ireland. So on that, I'm going to finish up now, and I'm going to invite Paul Walsh, Chairperson of Cyber Ireland, to close out the conference. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Owen. I can echo a lot of Owen's comments with respect to thanking the speakers and all the organising committees. There was so much work put in the background, but most of the credit must go to Owen, because he's driven this from the start, and he did a magnificent job putting all this together. He had lots of help, but he was the engine that drove most of this, and very much Owen is the heartbeat of a lot of what we do in Cyber Ireland, and we're lucky to have such a great cluster manager. So thank you, Owen. This was a great day. Fantastic lineup of speakers. I think what it's shown us is there's a very strong, passionate community of cybersecurity specialists in Ireland. And today was kind of a step forward in building our community, trying to get representation from all, sectors of our ecosystem. And building the brand and the community has been key to us over the last, 2.5 years. We're very pleased with today's event, but we really look forward to your feedback in terms of what we can do better. And in particular, where we go from here. We covered so much information today. A lot of information was shared, by the speakers and also on the chat windows. So we will pull that together and make sure that we can package that up and make sure people have it. But there are other areas that we want to dig a little deeper into. We've kind of maybe whetted people's appetite for more information in particular areas. So we very much would like to get your feedback in terms of how we move forward and provide additional context for people in certain areas. There were a few themes that came up. Skills, pretty much popped up all over the place, and talent. So that session was a really good session, and it showed, the breadth of activity underway to help solve a problem. There is a shortage of talent, and what's interesting is companies are finding ways to fill the gaps they have in their organization. The traditional methods of hiring, are not maybe producing the correct number of graduates or employees to fill the key roles. So companies have been creative, and we outlined a lot of those activities today. I thought there was something more particularly interesting, but I think what was important is the breadth of activity in cybersecurity. It's not just looking for real technical strong resources. They're critically important, but it's such a broad area that we're looking for a wide range level of talent. And I think the opportunity here, for us is to dig a little deeper into all the programs available, and then also share kind of best practices, but more importantly, to look at the pipeline. That's the challenge that isn't going to resolve itself quickly. And a lot of work has gone into that, but we need to do some more here as well in terms of going, into the secondary schools and even to the primary schools. The PTAC program that was mentioned today was particularly interesting. I thought that was a fantastic program with a great outcome. And it's certainly one that I'd like to look more at it, to see how we can, leverage that across more schools in the country. Apprenticeships was mentioned as well. I think that's definitely a way forward. And Ireland in general, I think lags behind other parts of Europe in that sense. Because the opportunity here is to grow the industry. And if, we could solve the talent problem, we probably wouldn't have much barrier in terms of driving the employee base forward across the country. We also talked a lot about collaboration. We were able to, talk about, or showcase collaboration that takes place today, across government agencies. We partner today with Enterprise Ireland and IDA and, the NCSC. And it was great to see, the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau represented as well on the call, and talk about how the collaboration is taking place there. But it's essential that we marry up the government collaboration with, industry collaboration and sharing of information to get the results that we want. The Minister, talked to us today, about, the strengthening and expanding the NCSC, talked about developing talent and training people. And essentially that door is open. We want to spend more time, with the minister, because there are initiatives that the government needs to do or to get involved in to create more, I suppose, global or not more national impact. Education, as we talked about, has a big play in skills. Also, in the research and development session, the government has a big role to play there. So, we welcome the recent investment, but certainly there's definitely more that we could do there, and we would very much appreciate the opportunity to put forward some suggestions and ideas on how the government could be more effective. And when you look at, some of the, programs taking place in the US, in Virginia in particular, really kind of shows you the opportunity that's there. So, we very much look forward to being able to, drive the growth of this industry. Owen Hinchy kind of challenges to be more ambitious. And, I thought his story was a remarkable one. And I think he's right. There are examples, across the world that we could learn from, but there's no reason why Ireland, can't be to the forefront of cybersecurity internationally. Israel is an example for us to look at, and certainly is ahead right now. But we have a wonderful opportunity to be a global leader. Building trust was another key theme. It popped up in pretty much every session. This takes time. It exposes our vulnerabilities, but it's really essential for success, and building relationships, and creating, that level of trust across the various, strands of the ecosystem, I think is really important. And only from there can we build and create opportunities to share information. So as an industry, I think we're facing very similar challenges. The path forward, I think it requires us to be more collaborative, and, share more across industry, academia, and government. But we all have a role to play, I think, in terms of, developing this wonderful opportunity, kind of growing industry and making Ireland the kind of go-to kind of global location, for cybersecurity and kind of help us build a kind of safer world. So to finish, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Simon Sinek. If a movement is to have impact, it must belong to those who join it, not those who lead it. So thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate your attendance and your engagement. And we, like Owen, I look forward to getting out and meeting people over the next few months. And I look forward to meeting you all in the next session, whatever that might be. Thank you.